Hello and welcome back to Gas Buteo Tabletop Football, where we're actually getting back to doing a bit of this stadium seated area build. You might be glad to hear. So let's move that way. No more messing about going to Subbuteo shows or, in fact, real football. Let's forget about all that rubbish for a minute and get back to important stuff, which was building this. Now, I think last time when I left you, and it was a while ago, so my apologies for that, been a little bit busy doing other things. I think I left you saying what you need to do is cut some thicker lengths of MDF board and some thinner lengths. So by now you should have ended up with a nice big pile of bits and pieces like this. Now let's just all remind ourselves what we're talking about. I've got a bloody ruler here to measure them up. But they're basically 1 centimetre, and if I remember rightly, is it 3 centimetres? Anyway, look at the last video and you'll remember how thick that is. But these ones are definitely 1 centimetre thick. Now, once you've got a big pile of them, what you can do is start sticking them together into the steps. Right, so I've got to bear in mind that you are sideways view on. So bear with me if that all goes wrong. So the basic thing you're looking for is to glue them like so. Okay, now I've got some here that I have made earlier. That's what they will look like. If you see the profile, they are glued. And there's a few things you've got to be aware of when you've done that. First off, although it's very tempting just to get that and glue that, and you think, yeah, that'll be fairly accurate once I've done that. If you do a lot of them and then stick them all together and don't keep an eye on how level they are, little very small, almost microscopic differences. I don't know if you can see, I'll move it up there. Imagine if you glued it just slightly off, even just 0.5 millimetre off. Then gradually, as you build the steps up, you're going to notice a big difference in the thickness on one side to the other. So what I advise for that is you build something like this, a mini little jig of some sort, which has a fixed length glued on. And then when you stick on your 1 centimetre length on top of there, you can measure it's in the right place on both ends, and you get a much more accurate step going up. All right, so that when you start gluing them together like this, as long as you follow that line, you're less likely to have a disparity on one side compared to the other. So it's always worth, it doesn't really matter how deep that is. The point is, that when you stick things together, it's the same depth either side. Yeah, got that clear? Now, next thing you might be saying, glue. What glue do you use here? Now, last time I did this, I used a range of glues. I had some sort of I think it was like an MDF cement or something like that. That was good, really good at sticking it, but it took a while to go off, so it was a bit of a slow process and it was a little bit messy. I then switched to using PVA, which was a lot easier to use and maneuver around, but it took ages to dry and it wasn't particularly strong. And then eventually I settled on, I don't know why it took me so long to reach this, a glue here. And I just put a caveat in there. This company doesn't sponsor this episode of the show at all. It's something that I've bought myself and I use a lot, and that is this sort of glue. I'm not suggesting you use this glue. This is what I use, and I found that this is a really good compromise between using a sort of glue that you can move around, dries relatively quickly, so it's got a sort of a first stick within, say, about 15 minutes, and then once it has gone off, it is pretty strong. It says in there, incredibly strong, 100% tough. Never had any problems with it, so that's the glue I use. What glue you use is your business. Now, other little tools, apart from your jig, that you might want to consider using when you're doing this, is something that won't cost you a lot of money, but always worth getting them: mini clamps. Now, if you've never seen these before, I can't imagine you haven't, but if you haven't got any, don't think they're an expensive item to buy. You can buy packs of these, like 4 packs of them, in places like B&M for £1. Or if you go into any sort of pound shop, you will find these knocking around somewhere. They don't have to be top quality ones. All they are is a bit of plastic with a spring in it. But 4 for £1, You spend that pound, and I tell you, it will make this job a hell of a lot easier, because you glue them down, you measure them up, and what I tend to do is glue both sides and then stick another one of these clamps in the middle, and then you leave that for about 15 minutes and that'll be dry. Certainly dry enough that you can gently move it around. I wouldn't flex it too much because it would come undone. But then you leave them overnight and you end up with a lot of these piled up, so sort of almost step shaped. Now you may be thinking, what do you do with them? Well, what you need to do then is the same process and start sticking them together, like so. So imagine if I've glued these. I won't glue them now, but you know, you'd glue it, use a Gorilla Glue, or whatever glue you want to use. Other glues are available. And then you clamp them like that, leave them to go off, come back, and then that'll be stuck together. Now, what are you aiming for here? That's the next question. So once you stuck a few of them together, you will end up with something like this. See where we're going with this now? So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is 10 steps high, and this is going to be covered in the seats. Now, when you get to the ends, a couple of little differences. As you can see with these, one thick layer and one thin layer. The bottom, so the sitting position, has to have 2 layers, right, to fit the legs of the spectators in. So when you get to the bottom, I've stuck an extra thick layer on there, and that gives you enough sort of leg room to get a bloke or a woman sat down. And on the top, similarly, I've got one of the thin pieces, an extra one, so that's a 2 thickness high. So that is effectively 6 mils. And I've found when you put seats on top of that, it's just the right height for putting your spectators on. So that's where we're at the minute. If you are following this along and want to make something up similar, then go ahead and get on with that. What I'll do is make another one of these, and then we'll move on to the next stage, which is really working out how we're going to support it and sort of build it together, really. But that's that. Oh, while we're here, as I was chatting about a minute ago, this is an example of one that's gone wrong. So I was chatting about, I was doing this before I built up a little jig. So as you can see, this doesn't fit on that side, and it sort of fits on that side, sort of millimetre. Let me move that up. There's a bit of a millimetre gap. But then when you move it over that side, it's more like a 2 millimetre gap. Now, if I'd used this and carried on doing that, you know, it doesn't look like there's anything wrong with it, but there's obviously a millimetre disparity between that end and that end. Now, if I'd carried on with 10 seats and did a similar sort of thing, you'd end up with a centimetre gap. So effectively, that length from there to there would be a centimetre shorter than that length from there to there, and then that doesn't really work. I mean, this sort of thing doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, you don't want massive differences in length or depth, because it's just going to cause problems when you come and put it all together. So I think that's about that in a minute. Just as a sort of pointer of where we're heading with this, I've obviously got these seats that were sent in by Subutio Asylum. So eventually they're going to be sat on there. Let's give a bit of an indicator of what they look like. So it'll be that sort of job. And then there'll be a gap in the middle and another row of seats there. Right, all happy with that? Gonna go for that and I'll give it a go. Well, you give it a go and you let me know how you're getting on in the comments. What I'm gonna do for the next part of this is glue together more of these. So we've got 2 of these large stepped stroke seat areas. And then we'll start thinking about the supports and what we're gonna do with that. All right, sound. Well, until the next time. Up the gas.